Good evening, everyone. Let's hear it for Billy and Jacinta as well. Good job. They'll be back with us later this evening. Good evening and welcome to the Great Hall of Cooper Union. On this stage and at this very podium, the likes of Abraham Lincoln and the great James Connolly have both addressed audiences just like you. Tonight, President Clinton and Jerry Adams return to the stage to commemorate the historic signing of what will be 1 week from tonight, the Good Friday Agreement. Just like the Good Friday Agreement, these events do not happen in isolation. I would like to thank all our sponsors, the Ancient Order of the Hibernians, the New York City, Nassau, and Suffolk County Brahons, the Friends of Sinn Féin in the United States, Irish Unity Conference, the James Connolly Irish American Labor Coalition, the Ladies Ancient Order of Hibernians, and the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick. Thank you all for your support. Special thanks to the administration here at Cooper Union, who also accommodated the 15th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, where George Mitchell was a very distinguished keynote speaker in 2013. We returned again in 2016 for a two-night commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the Easter Rising in Dublin. I'd like to recognize Ambassador Nancy Soderberg for her invaluable assistance and guidance with the planning of tonight. I would also like to thank my friends Greg O'Loughlin and Kieran Quinn for considering every minute detail for tonight's event. Lastly, I want to give special thanks to our two keynote speakers this evening, President William Jefferson Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States, and Mr. Jerry Adams, former President of Sinn Féin, 1983-2018. We are truly fortunate to hear from the two key figures in making the GFA a reality. I also want to thank the most gracious staffs of both President Clinton and Mr. Adams. Without them, neither of our principal speakers would have been aware of tonight's commemoration. Lastly, and most importantly, thank you. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for being here this evening. And the Irish Americans that came here before you, that kept the issue of United Ireland at the forefront of American politics. And without your tireless efforts, there would be no Good Friday Agreement. On December 12th, 1918, the House Committee on Foreign Affairs held a hearing on the right of free Ireland to be freedom, independence, and self-determination. Many of the same sponsors here tonight and their predecessor organizations testified and submitted evidence in support of a united Ireland at that hearing. More than 100 years later, we still seek Ireland's independence through self-determination. The Good Friday Agreement provided a roadmap on how to make that possible. So why are we here tonight? We are here to reflect upon how far we have come from the impossible. Like most of you, I remember the troubles in the north of Ireland through most of the latter half of the 20th century. I remember the 10 men who gave their lives in peaceful protest on hunger strike. I remember traveling to Ireland in the late 80s and Jerry Adams appearing on TV, but his voice dubbed because of state censorship laws at the time. I remember the protests at the British consulate and the mock funerals here in New York City. But what I remember most was a sense of despair and people saying that a united Ireland, a peaceful Ireland, is nothing but a dream. It's impossible. The great Muhammad Ali once said, "Impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in the world they have been given than to explore the power they have to change it." Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration, it's a dare. Impossible is potential. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. So tonight, we look back and commemorate those brave individuals that rose to the dare. Those that challenged the opinion that peace and prosperity in Ireland was possible. Those that went to their elected officials and kept the Irish issue front and center of American politics. We have many of you here tonight. However, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize one that knew that nothing was impossible. He dared to challenge presidential candidates to commit to the cause of Ireland. It was this individual that elevated his own elected status in the New York State Assembly and called for a presidential conference on Ireland. I would like to take this moment to recognize my dear friend, John Deary, and his wife, Kitty. Stand up. I would also like to acknowledge someone else that is here tonight and was also very instrumental in getting Gerry Adams a visa and a key advisor to the administration on the path forward, Neil O'Dowd. Neil here? Thank you, Neil. Without John, Neil, and many others, then candidate Clinton may have never been asked about his position on a united Ireland. He may have never been asked to grant Gerry Adams a visa. Yet 31 years later, we are here at Cooper Union to hear both President Clinton and Mr. Adams talk about what was once thought to be impossible. Through their leadership and trust, they were able to overcome many obstacles. We will hear each speak to the events that gave rise to this hallmark international treaty between the British and Irish governments, that the U.S. government, through the leadership of President Clinton and the perseverance of Senator George Mitchell, made the impossible possible. It is no coincidence that they will be speaking from the same podium that prior dreamers like Abraham Lincoln and James Connolly spoke. Many during the time of Lincoln and later Connolly also thought what they were seeking was impossible. Like President Clinton and Mr. Adams, both of those leaders had very vocal detractors as well. Yet leaders lead, and everyone else is left to follow. Nelson Mandela had something to say about the impossible. He said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." So we're here in part to thank President Clinton and Gerry Adams for getting it done. And then the second part of our program will focus not on what was once thought impossible. Instead, it will focus on what remains to be done to see the full, true purpose of the Good Friday Agreement fulfilled, the reunification of Ireland. After we hear from both President Clinton and Mr. Adams this evening, we will hear from representatives of our sponsoring Irish American organization. These representatives will be joined by Gerry Adams and Congressman Richie Neal, who is no stranger to Irish politics either. Tonight, these organizations will reaffirm their commitment to peace as the path to reunification. They will be challenged as their predecessors were challenged. They will be called upon to double their efforts to see that we realize a united Ireland in our lifetime. This is not an easy ask. When civil rights violations are witnessed day in and day out, and it was during the Troubles, it was only natural that many wanted to get involved and help. But now many think the GFA, the Good Friday Agreement, has ended all that and Ireland is free. While it may be free from violence, it can never really be free while it is divided. Tonight is a reminder to everyone that nothing is impossible. However, it takes the effort of every person here to make the final destiny of the Good Friday Agreement a reality. As George Mitchell reminded us after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, peace is not a destination, but a journey. We can never relax. We must be vigilant and work to ensure that hope is never extinguished. I hope that after tonight, you will share our message with others and join us on the journey to a free and independent and united Ireland. I'm going to introduce a brief video. As I mentioned before, we had Senator Mitchell here 10 years ago. He couldn't make it tonight, so he gave us his remarks via video. A little back on Senator Mitchell. Prior to his election to the Senate, Senator Mitchell served as an Article III judge in Maine from 1979 to 1980. After 1 year of a lifetime appointment, he stepped down at the request of then President Jimmy Carter. President Carter asked Judge Mitchell if he would run for Edwin Muskie's seat after the president had asked Senator Muskie to become his Secretary of State. Judge Mitchell left his lifetime appointment to the bench to serve his country. After being elected to the Senate in 1980, Senator Mitchell quickly rose through the ranks to become the Senate Majority Leader in 1989. In this role, he was responsible for leading the Senate and setting the legislative agenda. He worked closely with both Democrats and Republicans to pass important legislation, including the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. Senator Mitchell is most revered by all of you for his work on the Good Friday Agreement. In 1995, he was appointed by President Bill Clinton to serve as special envoy for the North of Ireland to lead the negotiations between the British and Irish governments and the political parties in the North, in the hopes of achieving a lasting peaceful agreement. Through his tireless efforts, Senator Mitchell was able to bring together the parties and broker the historic Good Friday Agreement, and in decades of violence in the North of Ireland, while providing a framework for power sharing and reconciliation between the communities. Senator Mitchell's work on the Good Friday Agreement earned him widespread acclaim and recognition, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1999 and the Liberty Medal in 2016. He continues to be a respected figure in the international diplomacy and conflict resolution. In addition to his work on the Good Friday Agreement, Senator George Mitchell has had a very distinguished career in both public and private service. He served as a special envoy for the Middle East under President Obama from 2009 to 2011. Senator Mitchell was the chairman of the board of Walt Disney, as well as on the boards of numerous other corporations and organizations. In 2006, he was asked by the Commissioner of Major League Baseball to investigate the use by players of performance-enhancing drugs. He also authored several books on public policy and diplomacy, including an in-depth behind-the-scenes look into the peace talks in the North of Ireland, entitled Making Peace. I've had the great privilege of getting to know Senator Mitchell over the years and can state unequivocally he is one of the greatest statesmen to ever serve this country in so many capacities. And just to give everyone here some perspective on his career and his dedication, his son Andrew was born on October 16, 1997. While the senator was in the midst of some of the most intense and difficult stages of negotiations. He was able to fly back to New York just in time for Andrew's birth, and then returned to Belfast shortly thereafter to finish the negotiations and produce what we now know as the Good Friday Agreement. His daughter Claire wanted to be here this evening, but had a conflict with her school schedule. While we recognize all the success of the senator, we must also realize the sacrifices his family had to endure as well. So please join me as we listen to Senator Mitchell share his reflections on the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that my health does not permit me to be with you this evening, but I'm pleased and honored to be able to join you through this videotape. I thank Marty Glennon and his colleagues for organizing this event and for inviting me to participate. I'm pleased that Marty himself will receive a well-deserved honor this evening. I congratulate President Clinton, who is also honored this evening for his significant contributions to foreign policy and to international peacemaking. I also want to recognize Jerry Adams, who I understand will also be speaking this evening. Jerry, with Martin McGuinness, led Sinn Féin into and through the all-party talks which led to the agreement. They and the leaders of the other Northern Ireland parties that negotiated and signed the agreement, as well as the leaders of the governments of Ireland and the United Kingdom, deserve our recognition. A succession of governments in both countries worked for decades through many controversies and obstacles to initiate the negotiations that led to the agreement. In the summer and fall of 1994, both sides declared ceasefires. That created the possibility of a new set of negotiations, even though all previous negotiations had failed. President Clinton became the first American president to commit the United States to full and active participation in that effort. I was about to retire after several years in the U.S. Senate, the last 6 as Majority Leader. President Clinton then appointed me as his representative to Northern Ireland, and he announced a White House conference on investment in and trade with Northern Ireland. He became the first American president ever to travel to Northern Ireland while in office. As a result, as I'm sure most of you know, he is highly regarded in Northern Ireland and in Ireland as one of the principal architects of the peace they have enjoyed for the past 25 years. The negotiations began in June of 1996. I had the privilege of serving as one of the independent chairmen. I thought I was going to be there for about 5 months, but I ended up chairing 3 separate sets of discussions over a span of 5 years. They were long and very difficult. As I've said many times since, we had 700 days of failure and 1 day of success. After nearly 2 years of repetitious and unproductive talks, marked by insults and dramatic walkouts, I proposed a final intense effort and an early unbreakable deadline. It was a very high risk, but the alternatives were worse. The governments and the political parties still in the talks agreed. Finally, on Good Friday, April 10th, 1998, the 8 political parties still in the talks and the governments of Ireland and the United Kingdom reached agreement. In difficult and dangerous circumstances, those political leaders acted with courage, with vision and strength. In the aftermath, all were at some point criticized and rebuked. Some lost their political offices. Some of their political parties suffered steep declines. The agreement was a compromise. It did not resolve all of the outstanding issues, but it did, among many other accomplishments, end the violence and the conflict. And it established a democratically elected power-sharing government. The agreement was reached and has been sustained because it was not imposed from above or from outside. It was written and signed by the elected representatives of the people of Northern Ireland and of the governments of Ireland and of the United Kingdom. Then it was overwhelmingly approved in a free and open democratic referendum in Ireland and in Northern Ireland. On the evening the agreement was reached, I praised the men and women who reached and signed it. But I also said that it would take other leaders in the future to safeguard and extend their work. And so it has. It is now up to the current leaders of Northern Ireland, of Ireland, of the United Kingdom to act with the same courage and vision as did their predecessors 25 years ago. In human affairs, the solution to every problem contains within it the seeds of a new problem. So the current leaders face both updated versions of old problems as well as new problems, all of them complex and difficult. But they can and they must do what is necessary to preserve peace, to ensure for those they represent freedom and hope and opportunity. And we Americans must continue to do all we can to help and support them. I hope this evening's events will contribute to that effort. Thank you for inviting me to join you.
Let's give another hand to the president for having the foresight to pick Senator Mitchell. So Jerry Adams is known to many of us in this hall. He's been a good friend and a constant visitor to Irish America since 1994. He's a former political prisoner who was interned in Long-Kesh Prison without charge or trial. In recent years, a court has held that his incarceration was completely unlawful. In 1983, Gerry Adams was elected as an abstentionist MP for West Belfast, as well as president of Sinn Féin, a position he would hold until 2018. Despite being elected as an MP, the British government banned Gerry from traveling to Britain. Later, the same government would introduce censorship to prevent his voice from being heard on the airwaves. Gerry Adams, his family and colleagues were threatened by many, including unionist paramilitaries, opposing political parties, governments, all during this period of transition. Throughout it all, he remained steadfast in his commitment to achieving a united Ireland through peaceful means. As conflict raged, Gerry Adams set forth the Sinn Féin strategy in 1988. He said, Sinn Féin seeks to create a condition which will lead to a permanent cessation of hostilities, the end to our long war, and the development of a peaceful, united, and independent Irish society. 10 years later, the Good Friday Agreement was signed. Gerry went on to become the TD for Louth and lead Sinn Féin from the benches of the Dáil. The party is now the largest in Ireland, both north and south. Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin is now led by President Mary Lou McDonald in the Dáil and First Minister designate Michelle O'Neill in Stormont. Sinn Féin has more elected females than any other party in Ireland, north and south. I would like to add one personal story about Gerry Adams. When President Clinton granted Gerry Adams a visa in 1994, I had the privilege to attend several of his speaking engagements. However, the one that always stood out was the one after an event in New York City. Another event was scheduled that same night up at Gaelic Park in the Bronx. Given the high demand for Irish Americans that wanted to see and hear Gerry, all his events were filled to capacity. On this particular night, he had just finished speaking in New York City, and we accompanied him up to a Gaelic Park. I'll just say this, by the time we got there, the room was fully lubricated. Gaelic Park was shoulder to shoulder waiting for Gerry Adams to arrive. When he arrived, Gerry was greeted with an incredible ovation. All seats were taken and there was extraordinarily little standing room available. It was around the time of swirling controversy about gays and lesbians marching in the St. Patrick's Day parade. Gerry was not a minute into his speech when several individuals in the front row stood up and asked him, where do you stand on gays marching in the St. Patrick's Day parade? There was little or no time to react, and the scene was about to get very ugly as many immediately jeered those that interrupted Gerry's speech. Time slowed, and in that fraction of a second, Gerry Adams held up his hands to silence the crowd and pronounced loudly to the crowd, brothers, sisters, this is why I'm here. There's a place for everybody at the table. And it was at that moment I knew Gerry Adams was the real deal. I'm sure many of you have differing thoughts and opinions on what I just said. However, I tell the story to consider the context in which it occurred. Gerry Adams was here on a 48-hour visa, yet he did not hesitate in that moment. His civil rights background and his instincts jumped front and center. He was a relative stranger to the US and its politics, yet he had no hesitation in doing what was necessary and right. Gerry's message was not about Ireland. It was about tolerance of all diverse backgrounds and political beliefs. It was about giving people the opportunity to be heard, to air their grievances, and work on compromise to settle their differences. This is agreement between political allies and opponents that there would be no, there is an agreement between political opponents and allies that there would be no peace without Gerry Adams. I think you will all agree at that moment in Gaelic Park, Gerry demonstrated real leadership. Please join me in welcoming Gerry Adams.
Hiya, Rose. Hiya, John, and you're brave. Tá mé an sásta bheith libse, caithfí mé sin ar dús, agus an sásta bheith leis an Uachtarán, Bill Clinton agus ar cardja, agus tá mé buíoch fásta den na daine cóir an ácáid speisialta le héile agus go háirithe le Marty Glennon. I want, if I may, to dedicate my remarks this evening to our friend, Rita O'Hare, and her family. Rita spent 20 years here working for Sinn Féin as our representative. Our Jais Ja Uro Ahanam. Also want to say, on a happier note, happy birthday, Shannon Eaton. And I want to thank the Irish American organization which sponsored tonight's events. And I want to thank especially President Bill Clinton for your attendance. And for your critically important and ongoing contribution to the Irish peace process and the Good Friday Agreement. And thanks also to Congress member Richie Neal, who's been a steadfast supporter and I was delighted to see Senator Mitchell, our good friend, whose patience and good humor and wisdom helped to guide us through many difficult days. George once told myself and Martin McGuinness that achieving the agreement was the easy bit. The hard part would be implementing it. And he was right. However, despite the ups and downs over the last 25 years, we're in a much better place today than we were during the decades of conflict. But let's look briefly at how the latest phase of that conflict started. And I'll give you the short version. I come from Ballymurphy in Belfast. No one from my community went to war. The war came to us. In the 1960s, some of us demanded our civil rights, modest and moderate demands for equality and an end to discrimination and gerrymandering. The Unionist regime said no. They were supported by the English government in London. In 1969, the people of the North awoke to find ourselves once again under military occupation. This was to last for almost 30 years. The English government handed power over to their military elites. It was a brutal, repressive, and murderous regime. The Irish government unfortunately assumed the role of junior partner with the British, and the efforts of the British state were to contain a popular uprising and to suppress all opposition. And there were many hard efforts by many good people to find peaceful ways forward, and they all failed. If the militarists who ran the British system had prevailed, there would be no, and there would not have been a peace process. Not 25 years ago, not ever. A terrible war continued until it was brought to an end at Easter 1998, despite their best efforts. Now, since then, over 500,000 people have been born in the North. They and many others have never known violence unless personally touched by an event. Many are alive today who might otherwise have been killed. And that is the legacy Irish America and all of you in this room should be proud of. You, President Clinton, all of your positive representatives, Irish America helped to bring peace to Ireland. The Irish peace process was the work of many people. But for Sinn Féin, the roots of the Irish Republican engagement with the search for peace is to be found in our decision in the late 1970s to challenge those who had hijacked that word. They had hijacked the word peace. They were presenting peace as something they were for and that Irish Republicans were against. We challenged this. We argued that peace required justice. They argued that peace meant defeating Irish nationalists and Republicans. We argued for talks to achieve peace and against the exclusion of anyone. They dismissed this. In the early 1980s, our efforts were assisted by Father Alex Reid and Father Des Wilson, two Catholic priests based in Belfast. They pioneered the process of conflict resolution and preached the gospel of dialogue. They were lone voices. The Irish and British governments were locked into strategies of containment. The British locked into strategies of militarization as well. Their focus was on demonizing and isolating Republicans. Sinn Féin was an illegal organization for much of this time. We were censored, and although we continued to increase our electoral support, the rights of our voters were taken away by the governments. Our members were assassinated. The prisons were filled. Hunger strikes and prison protests were common. British policy entrenched injustice and deepened and perpetuated the conflict. None of that worked. On the contrary, it made the challenge of peacemaking more difficult. Peace building requires a different approach. It's not simply about ending violence. To do so, it has to tackle the causes of the conflict. Sinn Féin came to understand that if we were to succeed in persuading those Republicans who were involved in the armed action to stop, then we had to provide an alternative. And we soon learned that this was unlikely to come from the governments and from the good and the great. So Sinn Féin intensified our efforts to develop our own peace strategy. We published a number of documents and discussion papers, including Scenario for Peace and Towards a Lasting Peace. These identified self-determination as central to creating the conditions for peace. The people of Ireland have never relinquished our claim to the right of self-determination, but that right was denied us by London. Rectifying this, Sinn Féin resolved, needed to be at the core of a genuine peace process. There also had to be a mechanism to give effect to this. So the exercise of self-determination, along with the need to end London's Government of Ireland Act, became central to our peacemaking efforts. And we also revised our view of the role of the Irish government. We asserted that Dublin had a clear responsibility and an Irish constitutional obligation to establish an Irish national democracy. And we argued that an Irish government needed to have a strategy as a sovereign government of persuading the British that partition has failed. And both governments need to be persuading the Unionists that reunification will benefit them. We also argued that the Irish government should use its international outreach to support peace and Irish national rights, and that Dublin should defend the democratic rights of people in the North. So we increased our efforts to promulgate these positions, and it's very hard to do when you're underground. It's very hard to do when you're censored and when you're, in many ways, kept away from the normal processes of political activism. But we did strive to find common ground with others on these propositions. In the meantime, the war continued. The IRA was very active, so were British forces, including their surrogates within Unionist paramilitaries. Atrocity followed atrocity. By now, Sinn Féin had sizable political strength, and we demanded all-party talks. We reached out once again to our diaspora, and particularly to Irish America. Around this time, the British government reopened secret back-channel talks with us, even as they denied talking to us. Fianna Fáil also began a dialogue, and Father Alex Street was central to all this. In 1986, he arranged my first private meeting with John Hume. Listen to this, folks. That was 11 years before the Good Friday Agreement. 11 long, bloody years. And when eventually our talks became public, John Hume was pilloried by the British and Irish establishment and by many in the British and Irish media. And John demonstrated great courage in sticking with what became known as the Hume-Adams Agreement. And throughout our conversations and in our joint statements, John and I identified self-determination as key to building an alternative to armed actions. Through the hard work of many Irish American organizations and individuals, including Richie Neal, Tom Mannion, Peter King, Ben Gilman, Chris Dodd, Teddy Kennedy, and many more on Capitol Hill, and alongside the pioneering work of Bill Flynn, Chuck Feeney, Bruce Morrison, Neil O'Dowd, and Joe Jamieson, the cause of Ireland and the peace in Ireland became an important, pivotal political issue here in the USA. President Clinton's decision to give me a 48-hour visa in January 1994 was a critical initiative in the peace process. Up to this point, the British position was that the North was an internal matter for the British government. President Bill Clinton changed that. In doing so, he went against the advice of the State Department, senior politicians here, and some of his own senior officials, including the FBI and the CIA. And a furious British Prime Minister refused to speak to him for almost a week. President Clinton's initiative, along with John Hume and then Taoiseach Albert Reynolds and Ambassador Jean Kennedy Smith, helped put in place the building blocks of an alternative that Martin McGuinness and I were able to bring to the IRA leadership. In August '94, the IRA called a cessation. Seamus Heaney described this as a space in which hope can grow. It was a prescient comment from a great Irish poet and a writer. Less than 4 years later, all party talks commenced after some difficulties under Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, and Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, and all of the political parties except the DUP, which refused to attend. George Mitchell masterfully managed all of the competing positions. And President Clinton played a key role by staying in constant contact with all the contributors and committing the USA to be a guarantor to the agreement. On 10th of April, Good Friday, 1998, the Good Friday or Belfast Agreement was achieved. It's the most important political agreement of our time in Ireland. The twists and turns from then to now have been many. Currently, the institutions are suspended due to the intransigence of the DUP and the machinations of successive Tory governments in London. This is totally and absolutely unacceptable. The results of the last election to the Northern Assembly need to be respected. The Democratic Unionist Party need to take up their ministerial posts with the rest of us. And if the two governments remain intransigent, then, if the DUP remain intransigent, then the two governments should move ahead using the Good Friday Agreement All Ireland mechanisms. We cannot have a return to direct rule from London. It is not an option. The agreement has mechanisms, has political architecture, and both governments should use those to move forward. And the government also needs to implement elements of the agreement that have still not been put in place, including a Bill of Rights for the North. The Tory government should scrap its flawed and offensive legacy bill. It should implement the agreement on legacy reached 10 years ago. We appreciate the work done by President Biden to defend the Good Friday Agreement. People in Ireland still need the White House to act as guarantor, as President Clinton did, and as he vowed the US would do, and as President Biden continues to do. Embedded in that agreement is the right of the people of Ireland to decide our future. Our future, that decision, doesn't belong to an English government or indeed to the DUP. For the first time in our history, there's a peaceful way to end the union with England and to build our own future. And no one should be allowed to take that right away from us. The Irish government should establish a citizens' assembly or a series of such assemblies to discuss the process of constitutional change and the measures needed to build an all-Ireland economy, a truly national health service, an education system, and all the other needs of society. And we need national reconciliation. We need a citizen-centred, rights-based society, including the rights of our unionist neighbours and the Orange Order and other loyal institutions. The protections of the Good Friday Agreement are their protections also. The island of Ireland is their land, their home place. The Unionists are our neighbours. We want them to become our friends. Sinn Féin, under the leadership of Mary Lou McDonald and Michelle O'Neill, is committed to upholding everyone's rights and to working with them, with the Unionists, to make the island of Ireland a better place for every citizen. And it's my sense, and it's been always my sense, that we have the wit and the intelligence and the ability and the right to build a society which can accommodate and celebrate our differences and our diversity. Look at what's happening in other parts of the world. Reflect for a second at the horror which is happening in other troubled places. Very few countries get the chance to begin anew. Ireland, North and South, has that chance. So despite the current difficulties, the future looks bright. What is needed is the full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, including a date and the appropriate planning for the unity referendum. My friends, we are in a decade of opportunity. It has to be a decade of persuasion. The Good Friday Agreement created a democratic and peaceful path to Irish reunification. The great and the good used to say peace was not possible. And I give you this potted history to illustrate what a lot of us have come through. Some now say that unity is not possible. As Madiba said, some things are impossible until they're done. So unity is now a doable project. And with the continuing support of Irish America, we together can make it happen. And it's not inevitable. It needs hard work. But when we do the hard work, it's then we see the rising of the moon. Gora míle mágat. Thank you. Good night. I just spied Bruce Morrison down there. Hiya, Bruce. Fair play. Well done. Fair play.
Here for Jerry Adams again, please. He'll be back for a second half of our program. So right now I have two introductions, and I'm going to ask that they both remain seated till I'm through. There's going to be a special presentation to President Clinton that's going to be delivered from Ambassador Nancy Soderberg. Nancy Soderberg served as President Clinton's alternate representative to the UN from 1997 to 2001, and as the Deputy National Security Advisor in the first term of President Clinton's administration, as well as during the 1992 presidential campaign as Foreign Policy Director. Throughout her service, Ambassador Soderberg served as a key advisor on the Northern Irish peace process and was instrumental in launching the U.S. engagement in the Irish peace process, a historical first, bucking decades of U.S. and United Kingdom policy. She was the behind-the-scenes negotiator at the White House to promote President Clinton's decision to first grant Jerry Adams a visa to the U.S. to attend the National Committee's Peace Conference, helping to pave the way to the IRA ceasefire and ultimately the Good Friday Agreement. Overall, Ambassador Soderberg's contributions were critical in helping to bring about a lasting peace in the north of Ireland and resolving one of the most intractable conflicts of the 20th century. She's also a distinguished American foreign policy strategist, author, and professor. Throughout her career, Ambassador Soderberg has been a leading voice on issues related to national security, international relations, and diplomacy. In a moment, Ambassador Soderberg will make a very special presentation to the President this evening in her role as Vice Chair of the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Soderberg. As you know, we are gathered here to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the historic Good Friday Agreement, a landmark achievement that brought a new era of peace and stability to the north of Ireland. While there are many people that helped pave the road to peace, there was only one that could have made it possible. He would need to challenge our allies and convince his detractors that his vision for Ireland was in the best interest of everyone. The path to peace was far from easy. It required courage, determination, diplomacy, and a willingness to take risks. President Clinton's decision to grant the visa to Jerry Adams, then leader of Sinn Féin, was one such bold step that demonstrated his commitment to finding a peaceful resolution to the long-standing conflict in the north of Ireland. As many of you know, at the time, granting a visa to Jerry Adams was a highly controversial move, but not as controversial as when the president was then asked to grant a visa to Joe Cahill. While many in the president's own administration were vocal in objecting to granting Jerry Adams a visa, I'm not sure anybody would support Joe Cahill's visa. Rita O'Hare summed it up this way: the British government had strongly objected to Joe getting into the States and had the U.S. State Department. Joe went to brief an important and huge constituency, our Irish American supporters, who had stood by the struggle through thick and thin, and who had often been demonized as deluded romantics. Those who were really deluded were the critics who had no idea of how important, committed, and far-reaching into society were the first, second, and third generation Irish. Their Their continued support and influence was crucial and indeed flourished after the ceasefire and after the Good Friday Agreement. That is a quote from Rita O'Hare's book that'll be out this year. By allowing both Jerry Adams and Joe Cahill to visit the United States, President Clinton took a significant personal and political risk. He faced considerable backlash from those who saw this as a betrayal to the United Kingdom, our closest ally. Yet President Clinton understood that to achieve peace, all parties needed to be brought to the table, and dialogue was necessary, even those parties that his administration thought were questionable. Before any public announcements about Jerry Adams' visa involvement in the negotiation peace process, President Clinton held a series of private meetings engaging in delicate diplomacy and with various stakeholders. These clandestine discussions laid the groundwork for what would later culminate into the Good Friday Agreement. The decision to grant Jerry Adams a visa played a crucial role in opening up channels of communication, leading the way for the historic negotiations that brought an end to decades of violence and suffering in the north of Ireland. President Clinton's commitment to peace was unwavering. We all remember the historic visit to the north of Ireland in November 1995, the first sitting American president to ever visit Belfast. Imagine a risk for an American president at that time to interject himself into what was seen as British politics. His education at Oxford during the 60s made the president very aware of the troubles and the perception that his visit would have on the peace process. The president forged the trust of then British Prime Minister Tony Blair into partnering with the president to make a difference, and what a difference it was. Today, we commemorate the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which stands as a testament to the power of diplomacy, persistence, and the resolute belief that peace is possible, even in the most dire circumstances. President Clinton's leadership and vision were instrumental in this process, as he navigated the complexities of deeply divided region and brought together parties who had long been sworn enemies. His leadership provided others with the necessary cover to take similar risks. He backed his allies and used diplomacy to convince those that would not initially agree with his vision or his methods. As President Clinton once said, we must find new ways to speak to one another, to respect the diversity of our cultures and experiences, and to share the values that unite us. At an event only a few months ago, the President explained that 99.9% of our DNA is identical from one person to the next. And yet, that tiny difference of just 0.1% has a profound impact on who we are. The success of President Clinton and his perseverance throughout the peace process was his understanding that what really divides us is minute compared to what we all share. He was so confident that he could make peace where no one ever thought it possible because he did not focus on what divides us. His focus was on what unites us. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to a man who has shown time and time again that there is no challenge too great, no obstacle too insurmountable when it comes to the pursuit of peace and the well-being of people. The 42nd President of the United States of America, President Bill Clinton, and Nancy Soderberg.
Thank you, Marty, and thank all of you for being here. And just give another round of applause for all of Irish America. It's extraordinary to see Jerry Adams and so many others who had a critical role in the peace. The greatest honor of my life was to be part of President Clinton's team as he figured out how the US might break decades of US-UK policy and actually engage in the search for peace in Northern Ireland. And it's a great privilege for me to join the team of the National Committee in awarding the American Foreign Policy, the National Committee on American Foreign Policy's William J. Flynn Initiative for Peace Award. This award has a long history with President Clinton and the search for peace in Northern Ireland. Hans J. Morgenthau founded the committee in 1974 to help promote resolution of global conflicts that threaten U.S. interests. And the late Bill Flynn and the late Tom Moran drove the soul of that organization, while George Schwab, who is with us here today, thank you, George. George served as the intellectual powerhouse of the organization, and this award was established in '97 to honor Bill Flynn's decisive leadership and daring diplomacy in spurring the ceasefires and promoting peace in Northern Ireland. And I also want to pay tribute to the National Committee for the brilliance of jamming us at the White House in 1994 on a peace conference and inviting Gerry Adams to participate in it. And while I certainly did not like the idea at the time, you've all read about the mad scramble to make a decision and the problems that we had with London that Gerry mentioned. But it was the right decision, and it changed U.S. policy and history. So thank you for that. And at the time, we were not sure if Gerry Adams could deliver a ceasefire. But the president thought it was worth the risk, and taking that risk for peace enabled Gerry to deliver that ceasefire and set the stage for bringing peace to the people of Northern Ireland. So thank you for the decision. And every time I visit Belfast, I wonder, walking around, watching people living simply normal lives, who among them would have been the 200 or 300 people a year who were killed during the Troubles? They don't know who they are, but you know they're there. It's one of the most powerful achievements. And simply put, ending that violence and achieving the Good Friday Agreement would not have occurred without President Clinton's vision and leadership in finding that right path forward and having the guts to do it. And since I started working on his campaign in '92, I have been continuously awed by the principled approach of President Clinton to solving world conflicts. He knew the U.S. could do more, not only in Northern Ireland, but also in Bosnia, Iraq, and beyond. And because he was willing to put significant political capital behind those efforts, the world is a better place these decades later. So it's my great honor to join the chair of the board, the president of the National Committee, in awarding the William J. Flynn Initiative for Peace Award to President William J. Clinton for his tireless work to resolve the conflict in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much.
I have been out of politics a long time, but if I can remember a few things. And the first is sometimes you should quit when you're ahead. So if I had any sense, I would say thank you and sit down. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Nancy, for being a rock all those years ago when only my national security staff thought I was right to grant the visa. And the State Department thought I needed to be committed. And I had just appointed ambassador to the United Kingdom, a magnificent human being named Bill Crowell, Admiral Crowell, who had been chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Reagan, retired, and stunned America when he endorsed me for president in 1992. something that just came out of the blue to me. He said, I endorsed you, I helped you, you gave me a great job, now you've made it impossible for me to do it. I said, Admiral, you'll find a way. There's so many others here I'd like to thank, and I don't want to get into a long litany, but I do have to say that Congressman, now chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Richie Neal, was on that first trip to Ireland with me, was there every step of the way, and I'll never forget it, and I thank him. And and I want to thank Bruce Morrison. I was looking for him tonight and I couldn't see. There he is. Bruce went to law school with Hillary and me, and he got me into this really. He and Neil O'Dowd and Carol Leclerc and a few other people, but said I really had to go to this meeting of Irish Americans in New York. And then I said, well, what do they want me to do? They said, they want you to appoint a special envoy. I said, that's a big deal? He said, oh, it's a big deal. No American's ever done it. I said, but I want to solve the Irish problem. And they can't do it without American help. And the Irish diaspora in America is profoundly important and all this. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So he got me into that. And then the proverbial hit the fan. But I thank you, Bruce, for all these long years you have been plugging away. And when I do want to give special acknowledgement to all the Irish American groups that are 7 of them who've come together, and especially the National Committee on American Foreign Policy, Susan Elliott, Jeffrey Schaefer, George Schwab, who was deeply involved in the original conference that invited Jerry to make that speech in 1993. I think he even picked him up at the airport, which makes him more complicit than me. There were generally, I think presidents should not get awards. I think the job was honor enough. But this means a lot to me because the pursuit of peace in Northern Ireland meant the world to me and still does. And I always promised myself when I left the White House that I wouldn't be a used to be person. You know, didn't you used to be something or another? I tried not to do this. I like to live in the present and for the future. I like the fact that Jerry Adams gave a speech about the future tonight. They had an election in Northern Ireland. Brexit was a roadblock. It threatened to blow up the whole thing. This Windsor Agreement, I think, is about as good as anybody could get. And we ought to stand up the government. And I think, and get on with the business that the people voted for delegates to serve in the Northern Ireland Parliament in Stormont to do. Sooner or later, you just have to do. Now, increasingly in the modern world, all over democracies, not the least in America, more and more people see politics as sort of a performance art. an exercise in triggering identity reactions. And it's a lot easier than getting something done. Making people mad is harder than making progress together. I mean, easier than making progress together. And we have some people now in the United States who are great at it. I mean, they really are. They're really good at this, making people mad. But when you're as old as I am, and the thing you really worry about is what the world's going to be like for your grandchildren, it seems like a quick hit with no fulfillment in it. So I just want to see the Irish peace flourish. I want to see what was enshrined 25 years ago make a difference today. I am so grateful for everyone who played a part in it. I mentioned most of the people, including my staff, but I would like to say there were so many other people. I remember when we were dealing with the visa question, the question was basically forced on us with our encouragement. I wanted to be forced into it by Bill Friend, Tom Moran, the NCAFP, inviting all the parties to this conference in New York. But I think we shouldn't forget that the party started to talk in 1992. And I know it's fashionable to sort of pan John Major, but the truth is he had a very narrow political margin in Parliament. It was very easy. The Northern Ireland parties could bring his government down. And he still opened the door, he started. And I've always given him credit for that. I think it's important to recognize that Albert Reynolds was there when he was there, and Albert Reynolds urged me to grant the visa. And then John Bruton, and of course, what happened in the end with Bertie and Tony Blair was great. But every one of them tried to do something to make it better. And then George Mitchell, I was thinking tonight, looking at him, he's still got it, doesn't he? I mean, he's really good. You should have heard what he said in private. You know, he's talked about how he was going for 5 months and stayed for 5 years. I said, George, you'll be great at this, and it's just a part-time job. You just take a few flights over there. And over the course of 5 years, I don't know how many times he called and said, I want to make another report on that damn part-time job you gave me. But he was good. Mitchell's has this uncanny, you could see it tonight, got this uncanny ability to listen, absorb, respond, organize, and treat people with respect, whether he agreed with them or not, and then figure out how to put it together. And I told him that he and I were ethnically well suited to do this work. Me, because my maternal grandfather was from a family that the oldest known homestead we have is a sort of a shell of a building now that's a little bit outside the village of Rosslea in County Fermanagh, right on the border. So the legend has it that the Catholics and the Protestants, God forbid, intermixed. So I was genetically prepared. Mitchell is his ancestors were part Irish and part Lebanese. And Lebanon was virtually torn apart by sectarian violence in the 70s. And the country survived. And when let alone has thrived, when let alone by outsiders, by basically doing their version of what the Good Friday Accord does. Renounce violence, majority rule, minority rights, individual rights, human rights, shared participation in the government, shared economic benefits, and special relationships not only with the United Kingdom, but with the Republic of Ireland. And it was working like a charm for a long time, not only because of all the leaders, and I can't thank George enough. He really was brilliant, and I believe his daughter Claire is here. But it was the people that made this happen. You know, politicians don't operate in a vacuum. And you could just feel it. When I went to Belfast the first time, and I met Jerry on the street, and it was like we just happened to run into each other, you know. You could just feel it. When I was in that Mackey's plant where they still had an entrance for Catholics and an entrance for Protestants, and listen to those kids talk, you could feel it. People were sick of it, especially the young people. They didn't want the killing to go on. And they expected grown-ups to act like grown-ups and figure out what the heck to do so they could stop shooting each other and start living together and planning the future for their kids. So I think the Irish people deserve a lot of credit. And as Jerry reminded me before we went up here, even though the margin was smaller, in the United Kingdom, in Northern Ireland, in the vote on the Good Friday Accord, both communities voted for it with a majority. And I personally believe that one of the reasons that the agreement worked so well is, at the time, the Unionists knew that if just the regular birth rates continued as a cultural constant, they would not always be in the majority. They were going to lose it. And that if they treated people right under current conditions, then they created not only the legal right, but the moral presumption that they would also be treated fairly and be a part of a common life, which Jerry talked about explicitly tonight. Then there was the period when we had so much immigration. I mean, if someone had told you 10 years ago that the names of the leaders of the UK and Ireland would be what they are today, how much would you have bet against it? So all this stuff is happening, and yet still the hold of identity politics is inexplicably great. I mean, it's crazy. I don't know what's going to happen tonight in the national championship basketball game, but I know if UConn wins, it'll be because, in part, of a guy from Mali. How many people from Connecticut do you think have ever been to Mali? So we may think what we like. The truth is that what we have in common is more important than our interesting differences. Our differences matter, all right. But our differences matter for two reasons. One is I could fill this distinguished hall with the studies that have been done that show that diverse groups make better decisions than homogeneous groups or lone geniuses. That's just a fact. People who bring their perspectives, their experiences, their understanding, they just make better decisions. And the other is that if you believe what you have in common matters more and you agree with the end, then all those differences help you, because nobody's right all the time and a broken clock's work right twice a day. And we all spend our fleeting lives trying to get as far away from the broken clock model, horn beat right all the time. And sometimes we're going to get stopped along the way sometimes before we ever get to 100% of the time. We want to create a climate in which our differences enable us to find the COVID vaccine in record time. Send telescopes into space to take pictures of black holes 55 million light years away. I'll just say one thing about that before everybody gets all hot under the collar about whatever the latest Irish flight or the latest American flight is. When we saw that black hole in the universe, remember with the fire all around it, 55 million light years away, the physicist who was quoted in the article I read said that its pull, its gravitational pull was so great that if our entire solar system, not Earth, the whole solar system flew by it close enough, it would be sucked in and turned into a pile of dust that would fit in a large thimble. We're laughing about it, but makes you think it may not matter so much as on Mount Rushmore. Or who's the richest person in the world, or who's the whatever. We're not going to deal with any of these things that we have to face until we can first deal with each other in the proper way. The Good Friday Accord reflected the willingness of the leaders and ultimately the citizens of Northern Ireland to look at the world in that way and to crave in the deepest possible way the prospect of a normal life that would let people develop and chase their dreams. And every one of you should feel proud of that. My daughter, who is kind of our in-house expert on healthcare and teaches public health at Columbia, wrote her college thesis on the history of Irish American politics, ending with what happened when I was president. And I said, well, how did I do, Chelsea, in your paper? She said, oh, Dad, you know, I think you went to that meeting in New York because you wanted the Irish vote in New York. He said, but I also think you knew a lot about it and cared a lot about it by the time you showed up. And the more you stayed, the more you cared and the harder you worked. You appointed good people. You made good decisions. You did okay. I said, you know, so all of us who have been judged by our grown children know that's about as good as it gets. It's a great deal, right? So what are we going to do now? Well, First, I want to echo something Jerry said. We should be grateful that the peace is held. You know, I've not been involved in any peace process that turned out to be absolutely perfect without difficulty. We had the peace in Kosovo, which has held up better than I thought it would. And we had one Kosovar Albanian Muslim government actually, Orthodox government actually, Muslim government provide 4 extra towns for the Orthodox community to be mayors of. So they have more mayors and more representatives in parliament, so they'd feel more a part of the country. But it's easier if you have a 9-to-1 advantage in population. The Bosnian peace is not proceeded as far as it should have because of identity politics. Because the Serbs keep thinking if they say no long enough, they'll be able to break up the country. The Rwandans have done astonishing things, but they still feel the lurking possibility that they could return to the nightmare of the early 90s. Mandela created the Truth and Reconciliation Council and put the leaders of the parties that kept him in prison in his cabinet. I'll never forget one night he called me and he said, we were talking about something else. And I said, how are you doing? He said, they're giving me hell. I said, who, the Afrikaners? He said, no, my people. They say, look, how can you put these people in your cabinet? They kept you in prison for 27 years. They beat you up. They killed some of us, and now you give them these jobs? And I said, what'd you tell them? I said, well, we voted for the first time in 300 years. Can we run the banks ourselves? Can we run the military ourselves? Can we run anything in the country? Can we run it all by ourselves? Maybe someday, not now. We've got to do this together. But there's a price. Yitzhak Rabin lost his life trying to bridge those divides. Gandhi lost his life because he wanted an India for everybody who lived in the country. And they're still fighting the same battles today. So those of us who are Americans and have any connection to Northern Ireland or to the Republic or to both, we have a special responsibility here. Yes, celebrate. Let's be happy. Gosh, it was an unbelievable thing. There were times I never thought it would happen. Yes, I did stay up all night the night before the agreement, waiting to be told who else to call and who else to plead with, including Jerry. That's all true. But we should thank God that we got a chance to do something like that, and that it's lasted for 25 years. And we should take the remaining issues and deal with them, beginning with empowering the citizens who voted. Because all over the world, this stuff is still going on. And the more intractable the problems seem, the more people are tempted to play performance politics, identity politics. All I have to do is make people think you're worse than I am, and I'm home. I don't really have to do anything. I just have to scare you, spook you, do all this stuff that's going on. We got to beat that back everywhere. But you can't beat something with nothing. You have to have examples. You have to be able to point. And right now, there's all the peace agreements that have happened. in the last 25 years, and I'm proud that I was involved with so many. I fought for and still work for what I hope will be a good outcome in Colombia and several other places. But there is nothing like the Northern Ireland Agreement in terms of its endurance. You may see its flaws, you may see its imperfections. You have no idea, unless you've looked at all these other things, just how hard it is, just how improbable it was, just how good you should feel about yourselves for what you did. And we need to finish the job there. Because this whole world could go off the rails. Being governed by and run by people whose perspective is what's going to happen in the next election and how can I destroy my opponent instead of how can I lift the future of all of our children. All right. So I remember being very honored to be asked to speak at Martin McGuinness's funeral. And thinking if there was ever two people I never expected to be dancing together, it was Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness. And maybe they did it for their own reasons. Maybe they did it throughout calculations of what was in their interest, but their calculation of their interest was right. That is, so I want you to think about this when you leave tonight. Celebrate the Good Friday Accord. Thank God that it lasted 25 years. Pray to God that it will last 25 more, but that it won't take 25 more. Have a workable, political, democratic, peaceful, constructive solution. Because time is passing. Children are growing up. People are making decisions about their lives based on the range of possibilities that are out there. I try to live with the discipline of gratitude. Everybody suffers heartbreak and setback. Everybody has self-inflicted wounds and then unfair wounds inflicted on them. Everybody. You still got to get up tomorrow and decide what you're going to do with it. And every day you give in to all that is another day you lose, and a life that passes quickly, even if you live to be 100. I'm honored to be here. Abraham Lincoln devised his version of the Good Friday Accords and announced it here. That's what the Cooper Union speech was about. How can I hold this country together when it's about to fall apart? Stephen Douglas, his main opponent, said, let's just let everybody vote on slavery. And Lincoln said, no, slavery is wrong, but it is written into the Constitution. But the framers also said, he told us for the first time that you have the right to limit slavery because they voted for what was called the Northwest Ordinance and eliminated slavery in the north central states of America, what were then the north central. And so I favor to hold the Union together, leaving the Constitution the way it is in the 13 states and banning slavery everywhere else. It was a breathtaking speech. He did all his own research. He spoke for 7,000 plus words, and he hightailed around New England and gave a highly abbreviated version of the speech everywhere, and it made him president, that one speech. because there were enough people, even though we got less than 40% of the vote, there were enough people in a deeply divided country to vote to hold the dynamic center and go forward. That's what has to happen with the Irish question. And the whole world is still looking at you. Because we all pretended or believed that we were equal in the eyes of God, equal in our rights to go forward, and better off building than tearing down. That's what we're celebrating after 25 years. And it should guide us in what we do for the next 25. I read today, before I came here, one of the last pieces of poetry I ever got from Seamus Heaney. I miss him. I love the rascal. And we had a lot of good times together. But I will never forget when I was in Derry in 1995 and I quoted from his great short book, The Curate Troy, about when the long sought tidal wave of justice rises up and hope and history winds. And it was about Philoctetes and his magic bow. And Ulysses had to talk him off this island where he had been abandoned by the Greeks years and years earlier. And he was feral. He had not shaved. He was wounded, which is why he was dumped when the Greeks were running away from a battle. And his leg was a stump, but he still had the bow. And they needed him. And he buried his resentments and got on board, and they prevailed in the Trojan War. But after all that suffering, when he was pulling away from the island on which he had been marooned for a decade, he said, "It was a fortunate wind that blew me here." So Seamus quoted the section of the poetry that I read in Derry, and then at the end he signed it. "It was a fortunate wind that blew you here." And that's up on my wall at home. I see it every day. And I thank the Lord for it every day. All of us were part of something great and good. It's fortunate. But every new day is full of challenges, old and new. We owe it as the children of that fortunate wind. Continue to drive out the poison, lift up the love, and a sense of possibility. If we do, perhaps someday you'll be as good at life as the Irish are at poetry. God bless you. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to take a brief intermission, about 10 minutes. We're going to reset the stage for the second part of our program. Billy and Jacinta are going to play some more tunes for us. And please stick around. We're going to have the panel discussion with Jerry Adams and Congressman Richie Neal moderating it. But thank you so far. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Jerry Adams. Cheers, ladies.
Let us pause in life's pleasures, count its many tears, while we some sorrow from the poor. This song that will linger forever in our ears. Oh, hard times come again no more. It's the song, so times, hard times come again no more. Many days will have lingered around my cottage door. Oh, hard times come again no more. While we sing birth and beauty, confusing lights and gray, they're afraid of hearts fainting at the door. Though their voices are silenced, their pleading looks will say, oh, hard times come again no more. It's the song of hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered round my cottage door. Oh, hard times come again no more. There's a pale, sorrowed maiden, toils a life away with a one heart whose better days are o'er. Though her voice would be merry, sighing all the day, oh, hard times come again no more. It's the song, hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered from my cottage door. Oh, hard times come again no more. Oh, hard times come again no.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What's next? Right? Is that too early? No. Highest one, tournament of the innocent, you know. Can do Kevin Barrier. What's the other one that you Christy Moore one? No. I do a phone your rivers on free. What apples still grow in November, when blossoms still bloom from each tree, when the leaves stars still gleam in December. Then that our land will be free. I wonder our hills and the valley, and still through sorrow I see a land that has never known freedom, and still only our rivers run free. I drink to the dead of our manhood, of those men who would rather have died, and to me, all gains of bondage, to bring back their rights were denied. Oh, when now when we do, what part? Are you gone like the snow of last winter? And still only our rivers run free. How sweet is life, but we're dying. How mellow wine, but we're dry. How fragrant, oh, it's dying. How tender the wind, but it's sighing. What good is a new when it's aging? What joy tonight that can see? Where there's sorrow, there's sunshine and flower. And still only our rivers run free. How sweet is life, but we're dying. How mellow wine, but we're dry. How fragrant, oh, but it's dying. How tender the wind, but it's sighing. What good to you when it's aging? What joy tonight that can see? Where there's sorrow, there's sunshine and flower. I'd still only our river run free. I'm still only our river run free.
I'm only human. I'm just a woman. Help me believe all I could be and all that I am. Show me the stairway I have to climb. Lord, for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. One day at a time, sweet Jesus, that's all I'm asking of you. Just give me the strength to do every day what I have to do. Yesterday's gone, sweet Jesus, and tomorrow may never be mine. Lord, help me today, show me the way, one day at a time. Do you remember when you walked among men? Well, Jesus, you know if you look down below, much worse than men, pushing and shoving, crowding my mind. So for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. One day at a time. That's all I'm asking of you. Just give me the strength to do every day what I have to do. And yesterday's gone, sweet Jesus, and tomorrow may never be mine. Lord, help me today, show me the way, one day at a time. Help me today, show me the way, one day at a time. Thank you, everybody.
Think about how the first thing was on. How do you know? Oh, yeah. Hello. How's that kid? That's knock your bumbies. Right? Let's friggin' roll it. Hello, prison wall.